This is Ag Matters PM from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, brought to you by the Iowa Soybean Association, your daily recap of the information that affects Iowa's farmers, producers, and consumers, right here in the heart of the heartland. With reports from our award-winning broadcast team of Dustin Hoffman and Riley Smith. Now, from the IARN studios in Des Moines, here's Dustin Hoffman.
Well, good day, everybody, and welcome to Ag Matters PM from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. I'm Dustin Hoffman. Today is Wednesday, July the 27th, 2022. We thank you for joining us. Coming up in today's show, I talk with fellow farm broadcaster Susan Littlefield of KRVN in Nebraska. She is out at the U.S. Grains Council meetings in California. She talks about what they're talking about out there, and she also gives us a little bit of insight as to what the Nebraska farmers are going through just across our western border. But first, let's run down those markets. It's time now for the Ag Matters PM Closing Market Summary, your source for market analysis and settlement prices from the day's trade in Chicago, courtesy of the folks at agmarket.net. Well, we're at the end of another trading day, and for that we turn to Jim McCormick of agmarket.net. Jim, what did we see on this Wednesday?
We saw a very mixed trade actually today. The bean market was quite strong. The wheat market was under pressure all session, and corn is kind of caught in the middle of a tug of war, but it did end up a little bit higher when it was all said and done. There's two main storylines, Dustin, that the market I think is dealing with. The first one is heat. A lot of it is coming. It starts in the Western Corn Belt the weekend, early next week. And some of these models are pushing it all the way through next week, all the way into the weekend after. Temperatures in the upper 90s, maybe a few hundreds thrown in for good measure. And that's got the bean traders worried about the bean crop. As we know, August is ever the critical month for beans. Corn's finding a little bit of support from that news, but since the bulk of the corn market's through pollination, it's not catching quite the run up in the beans. And as for the wheat market, it's getting pressured because it does look like we're going to get some grain out of the Ukraine. I think the trade's a little bit optimistic on the volume of bushels they're going to get out, but it does look like some bushels are going to make it out relatively quick. And that seemed to be putting a little bit of pressure on the wheat market today.
You know, it's interesting. We've talked about the situation of Ukraine possibly getting grain out. I mean, just after we supposedly had an agreement last week, we got missiles fired into Odessa like the day after. I mean, that's got to make, export companies even like, I don't even know if I want to go in there now, even if they have an agreement.
Well, I think what you're seeing, Dustin, what kind of changed today is the hard part was finding an insurer, plain and simple, is, even if you could find a boat to go in there, a captain willing to take his crew in there, there was no one willing to offer the insurance. Well, now you're hearing some talk that maybe, the World Bank or maybe some governments will essentially be insurers of last resorts, kind of like when you get people who build houses in hurricane zones where you can't get a local or state or national insurance company to insure it, the government insures it. Well, it looks like they're trying to get some international banks maybe to be insurers of those bushels or those ships going into that country. And it sounds like they found a few people willing to do it. So that looks like that's going to allow some grain to come out. Now, I've always thought there's 80 boats up to 80 boats that are locked in that country due to the war. I'm guessing those guys are going to get out of the Dodge as quick as they can. They've been there in a war zone. They went out. The real question is going to be is how many other boats are willing to go in to the middle of a war zone? And then even if they do go in there, is there going to be any kind of capacity to actually load those boats? Because as you mentioned, they're still launching missiles at some of those port cities as we speak.
And another thing I would think is also grain quality. I did hear from somebody, who has connections to the ports there in Odessa and those places, saying that there are people going into these boats that are already loaded and daily checking the grain quality and doing what needs to be done to keep it up. But that can only be a battle that may eventually lose if it sits there too long.
Well, some of those boats have been sitting there loaded for 3, 4, 5 months. So, yeah, I mean, you're hearing people talk about it. We'll see what it is. I mean, we've seen that all along where we've loaded boats out in our country as well as other countries, and they get to the destination and, the buyer essentially says, we're not going to take it. It's out of spec. So we'll see what happens. When this deal was signed, you hear people are talking up to 5 million metric tons of grain being shipped out a month. I think you'll be lucky if you get 1 to 2 million to come out. We'll see, but I really think it's going to be a struggle at this point to really get them back into the export game.
So now switching over to the livestock side of things, obviously heat's a concern there, just like it is for the grains, even more so. Tell us what you're seeing with cattle and hogs.
Well, the cattle market right now is relatively in a sideways range. We are seeing cattle being moved to market maybe a little bit quicker than we normally expected due to the heat going on and the drought raging in the plains. So, that's kind of capping a little bit. Long term, those supply we believe is going to tighten. So that should be kind of a bullish signal or a bullish support down the line. We did get the Fed raising interest rates here this afternoon at 1 o'clock. They raised it 0.75 of a point as anticipated, so they're still fighting inflation. That could be viewed a little bit negative. Also, it's going to be a little bit more expensive, to finance any debt. So we need to keep an eye on that. Hogs, on the other hand, they continue to catch a nice bid. The cash market seems relatively strong. The packer margins are strong, and that continues to will help propel the hog market a little bit higher, hopefully near term.
And things we've talked about in the past since all this began with the inflation situation is how the consumer public is. And we were knowing that coming out of the pandemic, people were still wanting to just get out and live some life. How are things now a couple months later? Are we still seeing that, or are we seeing that tame down a little bit?
I think we're still seeing it, but I do think it is going to start to tame down. As we are moving into the latter part of July, you're getting into August. The reality is school is coming on quick. I mean, if anybody has kids in fall sports, they know the fall sports, training camps are all up and running. So, I think you're going to start seeing that vacation money kind of wind down as we get past Labor Day. We got one more round of buying, potentially having one last summer hurrah Labor Day. But in general, I think the market's going to struggle a little bit. You might see some demand shift over a little bit to, spending for school needs, and that might also hurt demand a little bit as people have to make choices. The reality is, inflation is still taking a huge bite out of everyone's income. We are getting a little bit break on the price of gasoline has come down, but it's still a very, very tight cash situation for a lot of people in the United States, unfortunately, and that will affect the demand for beef, especially the higher end cuts.
So there are people out there that want to check their marketing situation, maybe make some changes. How do they get in touch with agmarket.net?
You can reach us at 844-424-6758 or go to agmarket.net to sign up for some of our research.
All right, Jim, thanks so much for the insight. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you, and have a good week of trading.
That again was Jim McCormick of agmarket.net. Let's see how those numbers closed, courtesy of the folks at Bar Chart. September corn was up 3 1/4 at $6.25. December up 2 1/4 at $6.03 even. August soybeans up 46 cents at $15.78 3/4. November new crop up 26 1/4 at $14.10 even. Soy meal was up $11 at $4.46 even. Soy oil up $1.06 at $59.85. Chicago wheat down 13 1/2 at $8.08 1/2. Minneapolis wheat down 17 1/2 at $9.22 even. Kansas wheat down 15 1/4 at $8.69. December oats was a penny higher at $4.29 1/2. October live cattle 5 cents lower at $142.32. August feeders $1.67 higher at $179.10. Lean hogs were $1.62 higher at $118.60. Cutouts were $1 higher at $124.45. Class 3 milk was unchanged at $22.50. And that's been our ag market recap. We're going to take a short break here from our sponsor, the Iowa Soybean Association and the Soy Checkoff. When we come back, I talk with fellow farm broadcaster Susan Littlefield out in Nebraska as she is at the U.S. Grains Council meetings in California. We talk about what things are being talked about out there, and we also talk about the situation their farmers are facing in Nebraska. This is Ag Matters PM.
Iowa Soybean Association is driven to deliver for Iowa's 40,000 soybean farmers. We're proud to provide objective agronomic research, a helping hand with soil and water stewardship, and timely industry news powered by the Soybean Checkoff. Learn more at iasoybeans.com.
Welcome back to AM/PM from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. I'm Dustin Huffman, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Susan Littlefield of KRVN and the Rural Radio Network in Nebraska. She is coming to us from California, though, today. Susan, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I can handle this California weather after being in Nebraska and dealing with the hot temps. It's been absolutely gorgeous. I actually shut the air conditioner off in my hotel room and opened the windows.
Well, that probably explains why we've had the 70s since you've been gone then. Maybe you're the reason it's been so hot.
Well, I took all that hot air with me to California because during the day it gets up to about 100, 105. So I'm just going to say I brought it here, but I'm not bringing it back.
Well, we're going to hold you to that. So you're out in California for the U.S. Grains Council meetings. Tell us about what you're hearing and seeing out there.
Yeah, it is the actually 62nd annual Board of Delegates meeting that's taking place with the U.S. Grains Council. What a neat opportunity, because, for so long we've had so many hybrid meetings, and this is the second one that they've had in person. But yesterday we had an amazing slate, just talking about geopolitical and how it's affecting agriculture. Also having the conversation about what's happening in Ukraine. That was a big focus of yesterday. And actually, I'm looking forward to having the opportunity to speak with one of the speakers later today. She actually, as the war started, fled with her family. And when she said family, Dustin, I thought she meant her entire family, but unfortunately it meant her husband had to stay back. But she fled with her 2 children. And she was telling me yesterday that when the war started, or was rumored it was going to be starting, she packed backpacks for everybody in her family with a change of clothes, snacks, birth certificates, phone numbers for contact information, and money should they get separated. So she kind of talked a little bit with the group about what it was like fleeing Ukraine. She's now a professor at Kansas State University in Manhattan, and she talks about what's going to happen with agriculture. And both the speakers that we had yesterday just said the same thing. This war is not just going to end. Ukraine is not going to say, okay, we give up. And unfortunately, Russia isn't going to give up. They're going to try to continue until they win it all. But very interesting. Great opportunity to hear things that are happening. We'll be hearing for some great speakers later today. And of course, we're also going to find out what's going to happen in the next farm bill, as all the talks have been taking place right now.
Yeah, it's been an interesting situation, and it seems like from all sides. You talk about Ukraine. We thought there was a deal to get grains out late last week, and then Russia turns around and fires missiles into the country. I mean, I've talked to a farmer from Ukraine too, right in the beginning of the war, and he talked about how it was going. It's just a story that people maybe don't always relate to, is we've been fortunate in our lifetimes in the last couple generations to not have a war here. And so it's one of those things we don't think about, we take for granted, but for them, the fear is very real, and it's causing problems, even trying to get grains out. And that's what's causing some of those food crises in other parts of the country.
Well, I'm glad you brought up that, because one of the things she talked about was there are still barges sitting, waiting to leave. They are fully loaded with grain. If they haven't been destroyed or stolen, the grain that is still there, her brother still lives there, and her brother, who works on the docks, is one of the groups that gets the permission to go into these barges, vent them like they need to try to keep the grain quality as good as possible. So that's kind of nice to know that the work is still there to keep this grain, and so it can get shipped out. But to when it's going to get shipped out, she said she doesn't know. And this is something she said it could take 6-9 months to a year before they get back to any sort of normal grain movement, which, as we all know, makes folks in Africa and other countries very concerned, because they rely on that grain to feed their people.
Yeah, that they do. And the thing we talked about yesterday that I even hadn't thought of when I was talking to one of our grain analysts, he said, even if they do get an agreement to move the grain out, who's to say shippers want to go in there in that situation and even move it in the first place?
Exactly. And, there's some companies that say, hey, we're going to give you insurance to protect your barges, but are you really going to think what that insurance is going to cost? And are you going to try to navigate where all those mines are? And I think of these farmers too, and I'm excited to be able to have this conversation with her, but think of these farmers out there that are going to try to be harvesting these crops, and they've got mine or missiles and all that kind of stuff laying out in the fields. So that's going to be a big concern as well, just trying to keep their farm workers safe, keep the equipment safe, and try to get a crop harvested and then turn around and replant it.
So outside of the Ukrainian situation, what is the U.S. Grains Council talking about for the second half of the year?
Oh, they are excited. There are so many wonderful opportunities coming up in January. They're going to be making a trip to India. India is where the U.S. Grains Council just recently opened a brand new office. So they're going to be there to kind of kick off the big celebration. The office is officially open, by the way, but in January, they're going to be there. India is one of those hot markets. So right now is Africa, a great place that they're looking at and having those conversations. And I think if that's one thing COVID did not do, is slow down the conversations U.S. Grains Council had with so many contacts that they have all over the world. Obviously still working with Japan. They're back to now having these trade missions and the opportunity to meet with these buyers face to face. And as I talked with a couple of the guys here, the cool thing about it is they're having the opportunity to obviously have the conversations, but more importantly, these guys are like, hey, you're a farmer. We want to see the farmers that raise the grain. And so we get to hear a little bit more about that and finding out some things that they're going to do to increase the appetite for U.S. grain products. And Chad Willis was telling me, he's current chairman of U.S. Grains Council. He made the comment that there was some buyers that were fearful of what was happening with the crops here in the States because they heard how dry it was. And Japan actually sent some folks over. One of the grain buyers in Japan sent kind of a scouting trade mission type of thing over to the States here about a month ago just to see how the crops were doing. So, they want U.S. grain, and they're just got to be willing to pay for it.
And that's interesting. I used to do the Western leg of the crop tour, and it was a lot of foreign nationals that would come on behalf of their governments to scout how things were looking as far as getting trade done. And speaking of being on those tours and looking at crops, I know you're in Nebraska there, and you guys are about as dry as we are. I know you live right by the river, but you got dry land, you got irrigated crops. What are things looking like out there for you guys?
It's tough. We have had every sort of weather that can be thrown at Nebraska farmers this year. We've had more hail than I think I've seen in if we looked at a 5-year span, just in this growing season. The swaths of hail that have come through and just totally destroyed, guys have been able to replant. Now the big concern is coming from the seed side of it. And we know that unofficial numbers, some say up to 40% of the seed had to be replanted because the hail had damaged the original planting. But if we get rains, obviously irrigate's looking really good. Guys continue to run the pivots as needed. Dry land, it kind of looks like we're growing pineapple right now because the leaves have curled. Now there has been a swath probably in the last 48 hours of some moisture, some, as little as 0.10 of an inch, but any bit of moisture they can get is a great thing. So soybeans are looking okay. There's some shorter beans as well. Some canopies that haven't taken place yet. But the biggest thing right now is they're worried about insects and fungus. So we have got spray planes going like crazy and even spray helicopters. That's kind of become the new thing as well to get this insecticide and fungicide on these crops. But, a farmer, chips are down. They're still optimistic as to what they're going to see come harvest time.
And what other concerns are the Nebraska farmers worrying about right now this time of year?
The other right now for our livestock producers, Dustin, they're worried about, is there going to be enough hay? Many folks, we didn't get a lot of snow cover. A lot of alfalfa either was winter killed or they saw some sort of damage to it. First cutting was okay. I went by a couple of fields that I had seen when they originally cut for the first cutting, and they're about this tall. Now, at this point for second cutting, they should be a lot bigger than that, and they're starting to bloom. So there's a worry about shortages of hay. There's worry about the dryness because the drought continues. And so many producers are having to make that decision of, who do I cull? As you look at your cows, you look at your other livestock, it's the question of, all right, if I get rain, how many can I keep? If I don't get rain, how many am I going to have to get rid of? And it's a reality that's there. The number of herd liquidations that are taking place, not from a financial standpoint, but because of a drought standpoint.
I wonder what happened to those days where when we cut hay, we knew it was going to rain before we got it baled, and that's not working anymore.
It isn't. I would do anything to buy some rain. Let me grab my wallet and see what I can do to help, because on our farm, we are drastically short hay to get through the rest of the year. We do a rotational grazing, and we've already pulled livestock off of one pasture section because it's green, but it's not green. And so we don't want to overgraze it because we want to be able to, if we get a good rain, at least have some viable grass for the livestock to eat. And that's what everybody's in right now, really pulling cows off early, pulling sheep and goats off early because they want to be able to keep the ecosystem happy. And that's, I think, if one thing I can tell the consumers, farmers are very careful. Ranchers are very careful when it comes to the ecosystem. And they're going to watch it real careful because they know damage today isn't going to be repaired tomorrow.
Well, Susan, I know you got a busy day for you at the U.S. Grains Council meetings there in California. I envy you getting to be out there, but we thank you taking the time this morning to talk with us, and good luck on the rest of the meetings.
Well, thank you so much. And by the way, I am not seeing much of California. The walls behind you that you see are behind me. That's what I get to see. But I do get to look out the window. And let me see if it'll work. It's probably going to be too, but look, there's some trees. So you did get to see a little California back there in Iowa.
All right. Well, we have to get you out sightseeing like we did in New Orleans at Commodity Classic.
Or like what we did the last time we were in DC. I'm ready to go to Gettysburg once again with you and get some good pizza.
That sounds like a plan. Well, Susan, thanks so much for taking the time to visit with us.
All right. Thank you. And then everybody have a very safe rest of your growing season.
That's Susan Littlefield of KRVN and the Rural Radio Network here on AM/PM. Let's go ahead and take a look at that ag weather outlook. Well, it's another sunny day out there in Iowa. Again, a little bit to the warm side, but not as bad as what we think may be coming and what we had a couple weeks ago. So we'll take the relief while we have it. But is there any chance of rain in the forecast? Well, for that, we have to turn to what the National Weather Service has in store for the next 24 hours. Well, as I said, we saw some sunny skies today, a few clouds rolling in here and there, and there are a few chances of scattered showers and thunderstorms around the state, depending on where you are. Check local listings. But we saw highs in the mid to upper 80s. Now, tonight, there's still a chance of thunderstorms, but mostly after 1 o'clock tomorrow morning. And we're going to see highs in the upper 50s to the mid 60s. Tomorrow, then, a slight chance for showers and storms, especially in the south and east, but expect sunny skies to work their way through across the state. Highs in the upper 70s to the mid 80s. Taking a look at the affiliate weather map, we're seeing Cherokee and Waterloo both looking at sunny skies. Cherokee 77, Waterloo 79. The rest of the area and the affiliates, again, that southern and eastern part, we're seeing mostly cloudy, partly sunny skies, chance of showers and storms. Highs ranging anywhere from the low 80s in Clinton to the mid 80s in Des Moines. For more detailed forecasts in your area, tune to your local Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network affiliate. And that's been our Ag Weather Outlook. And just like that, we're at the end of today's show. You can find all our content online at iowaagnet.com. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, and also on YouTube, where you can find past episodes of Ag Matters PM, plus any of our video projects. So make sure you're hitting the thumbs up and that bell icon so you're notified when we put out a new video. Also, don't forget about our free twice daily market podcasts. You can find them on Amazon, Apple, Spotify, Podbean, and Google. From the IARN studios in Des Moines, I'm Dustin Huffman. For Avery Haskell and Riley Smith, we thank you for watching. This has been Ag Matters PM.